Alright, how do I start this video? Let's see. 5 months ago. No, that's boring. I did that last time. About a week ago, I finished Egghead, and it was fantastic. There's so much that goes into this arc, and after Wano, which was an arc that felt very separate from the rest of the world, Egghead is the exact opposite of that. If you've seen my last video, you'll probably recognize that the way I arranged it was kind of weird, because I talk about the arcs out of order. In this video, I'm going to do my best to go in the correct sequence of events from the Egghead arc, starting at the very beginning. So, stick with me for a little while, as we dive into the world of One Piece once again. Before I talk about the actual beginning of the Egghead arc, I want to first highlight what I thought this arc would do. I knew beforehand that Egghead would have something to do with the changeless Vegapunk, and I was very excited when I heard this because Vegapunk has been a name we've heard since I don't even know. We've known it for a long time now. So finally getting to meet him was something I was looking forward to seeing. I had no idea this island was going to be full-on futuristic, which made for a fun and unique island design. Story-wise, I had no clue on what I was about to witness. I need to also mention that I did not use One Piece for Egghead like I did for most of the other arcs. A friend recommended that I switch back, and it was definitely the right call because Egghead would have gone by way too fast. I don't remember if Egghead started with Bonnie arriving with the Straw Hats or Blackbeard going to the Island of Woman. Regardless, the Blackbeard scene sets up some very important events that happen in Egghead, so I think it's worth talking about here. First off, the introduction of the Seraphim. Not that one. These ones. Although those ones are pretty cool too. I thought the pacifistas were dangerous, but these guys are on a whole other level. They're calculated, fast, and no corrupt government should be able to control that kind of power. Rayleigh rising up to Blackbeard was awesome. I know Rayleigh's supposed to be more of a retired character because he already had his era, but I do want to see him in action more often. He's too cool of a character to sideline. Kobe also stood up to Blackbeard, and I think it's very interesting how we've seen so many of these characters evolve. Kobe had his dream, and he chose to follow it. And at the very start of the show, Kobe was stuck on Alvida's ship because he couldn't stand up to her. Now he's a high-ranking Marine who does this on a daily basis. That's some great character development right there. Speaking of dreams, Luffy also reveals he has a dream, and it's not the one about becoming king of the pirates. I'm very intrigued on what this dream is because he doesn't outright say it. I mean, knowing Luffy, it's probably going to be something regarding meat. Maybe it's to hold the world record of consuming the most meat, although if you ask me, he probably already achieved that. We've seen the government's power over others plenty of times in this show. There was the Ohara incident with the Buster Call, leading to many of its residents losing their lives. Then this happens again in Enies Lobby when the Straw Hat crew is attempting to free Robin. Or even the entire system of the government being unfair, where we see certain government figures making deals with pirates. But nothing could have prepared me for what would happen at the very start of the Egghead arc. The wipeout of the kingdom Lulusia. I definitely mispronounced that, and I'm so sorry if I did. I remember immediately texting my friend 3 words. I knew the government was powerful, but I didn't expect them to use the freaking Death Star on an innocent island. I think the fact that the Marines who work in the world government are told to cut off their communications when they're tapping into Sabo's call shows how insanely corrupt the structure of power is. They cannot know that they're being ruled by one figure, the figure that sits on the throne that is supposed to be empty. I honestly feel kind of bad for the Marines because most of them do believe they're helping the people in this world. I think one of the best Marines is Fujitora. He realizes some of the dishonesty in the government and fights to make it better. The abolishment of the warlords made it so there won't be people like Crocodile who take advantage of their power to harm others and get away with it because they're in cahoots with the government. Although that does make things harder for the goat. Anyways, back to the destruction of Lulusia. This scene was so well done. The back and forth shots of Sabo calling the revolutionary army to the elders and then to Imu was a great choice. And then the build-up of the music only to be silenced with the words, "There was no country to exist in the first place." I can't explain what exactly it was, but this gave me a feeling I've never felt. You could feel the dangerous threat approaching, and then everything just gets blasted before your eyes. If Sabo wasn't seen by the 5 elders, I'm like 90% sure that Lulusia would still exist. Of course, the government would still have the power of the Mother Flame, but I don't think it would have been revealed as soon as it was. The actual Reverie arc happened before Wano, so I was a little disappointed that the arc didn't show much of the events that occurred, and I'm so glad that Egghead went back to show us the whole story. I'll come back to the Reverie stuff a bit later in the video, but for now, let's talk about the main plot on Egghead. After the Straw Hats had their 200 episode stay in Wano, they're finally back on the open seas, traveling to their next destination. They see a little girl get thrown from the waves, and this separates them into groups, like it does literally every time. I swear every One Piece arc the Straw Hats get separated, but hey, the stories are never bad, so I won't complain. It turns out that Bonnie was actually the little girl that fell out of whatever that weird sphere thing in the ocean was. I was pretty surprised to see this because the last time we saw Bonnie, she was a grown woman, and was also part of the Worst Generation pirates. But that confusion eventually disappeared when I learned her power allows her to do that. Now, let me talk about the Vegapunks. I love this bunch so much. I think the chemistry between the characters is so fun to watch, although I hate York. When the Straw Hats first met the Vegapunks, I wasn't sure how trustworthy the Vegapunks were, because they did work for the world government. Lilith, the Vegapunk of evil, didn't really seem trustworthy, but I actually really grew to like her character. Her sarcastic presence always made scenes funnier, especially when she was complimenting Brook for thinking of a way to get the Sunny moving, but then immediately took that back because he didn't think of a way to stop it. Or one of the final scenes in Egghead, where she takes a moment to cry for Vegapunk's death, and then immediately thinks about food. Shaka, the Vegapunk of good, was also high up there on my list for Vegapunks. He overall wanted to help the Straw Hats out and ended up dying to his own kind. York. The main Vegapunk was the best one, for reasons I will talk about later in the video. The other Vegapunks are cool too, but I don't recall anything that stood out with their characters. Before meeting the actual Vegapunk and getting the whole explanation-y thingy, I was so confused on how there were more than one Vegapunk. And it's not just that, but each had an assigned role. One eats, and that satisfies the other Vegapunk's hunger. I thought that was a very creative idea, something that we haven't seen before. Everything in Egghead was very futuristic, but a lot of it was fake using holograms. However, there was one thing on Egghead that was different from everything else. I think you all know what I'm talking about. Emmett. This robot was mysterious from the very start and held that mystery all the way to the end of this arc. In fact, I'm still wanting to know more about this robot because it has large ties to the Void Century. The Seraphim are also reintroduced on Egghead, which is why I wanted to mention that part earlier with Blackbeard. One thing I found so funny is that the Boa Hancock Seraphim has the same emotion toward Luffy as the actual Boa Hancock, which makes me wonder if the other Seraphims have other traits of their characters. Now, again, I had no idea what was going to happen in Egghead. I did see something about Lucci in a scene I hadn't recognized, but that's about it. So I thought maybe Lucci will be the main antagonist for the Egghead arc. I was so wrong about that. He shows up to the island so early on and gets his butt whooped by Luffy. It really shows a good comparison of how strong Luffy has gotten. In Enies Lobby, he struggled on this fight against Lucci, but he had to keep pushing on to save his friends. And in Egghead, he pulls out Gear 5 so fast, Lucci barely has any time to react. Also, I just gotta mention, whenever those frickin' drums come on, you know stuff is getting serious. It's so hype. It's peak. I feel like the Egghead arc is Enies Lobby's twin. Yes, Lucci is in both of them, but the main conflict is very similar in both arcs. In Enies Lobby, you see Robin's view of the destruction of her home because of the people tried to learn the truth of their world. In Egghead, Vegapunk has gone poking his head into the Void Century research and recovered the books from the Ohara incident, and that triggers the government in sending CP0 to assassinate Vegapunk. The whole Impostor section also kept me on the edge of my seat. I guess not literally on the edge of my seat, because I was slumped down like a lazy bum. But anyways, there was one person who was feeding information to the government and aiding them in the assassination attempt on Vegapunk. This imposter had to have been a Vegapunk because they were able to access the laser dome and could control the Seraphim. And the ranking of the Seraphim ownership had Vegapunk at the second highest, which meant it was either an Elder on the island or it was a Vegapunk. And we all know there's not going to be an Elder on this island. Yet. I started pausing episodes looking for clues because I wanted to figure out who the imposter was, like any run of Among Us would go. I started using process of elimination and came to this conclusion. It can't be Lilith because it would be too obvious with her name Evil, and she really didn't seem like an evil person. She had also been with the Straw Hats the entire time. I also knew it couldn't be Vegapunk because why would he want to get assassinated? He's literally running away from CP0. I completely forgot about Atlas when making this theory, and I also didn't think it was York or the other robots. York got turned to stone, so it obviously couldn't be her. So my conclusion landed on Shaka. Shaka seemed to be in the main control room, and I thought maybe he's saying all this to divert attention from him. Yeah, that was... I'm so sorry, Shaka. I regret ever doubting you. And if you didn't know, I've been posting my reactions to the episodes in the community post, and this one with Shaka shares those same 3 words I typed to my friend. I think I talked about this a little bit in my last video, but Oda has gotten way more bold in killing his characters. I remember all the way back in Skypiea, Konus' dad gets blasted by a lightning bolt, but at the end of the arc, he shows up again. Or when Pell sacrifices himself in Alabasta and somehow survives that huge explosion. So every time a character actually dies, I have a hard time believing it. This was the case for Pedro and Yasui too. That plot armor is starting to wear off, and I think I need to be more prepared for characters to die. But seriously, I dug Shaka's character, and then they killed him off. So That was very unfortunate. And when it was revealed to be York, I wanted to punch my screen because I had no suspicion of her. York wanting to be a celestial dragon should have also been so clear to me. She's the lazy and greedy one. She sits and eats and demands from others, just like a celestial dragon would. Did I mention I hate celestial dragons? I also hate York. And I also hate Celestial. Let's take a step backwards from the whole Egghead plotline, because this arc is absolute chaos. There are so many other things occurring in the world while these shenanigans are happening on Egghead, and they aren't small events either. First, the Blackbeard versus Law fight. Blackbeard is still one of the most fascinating characters in this show. If there hasn't already been enough mystery, this man has 2 devil fruit powers, which should not be possible. And the devil fruits are some of the strongest too. So seeing my absolute goat of a character, Trafalgar D. Law, fight Blackbeard made for some insane visuals. And not only that, but the 2-ship stare down with Blackbeard's ginormous vessel and Law's tiny submarine. It was a short fight, but very well done. I really hope that he can get his crew reassembled again because he got cooked by Blackbeard. On to another fight, Kid challenging Shanks. This was our first look at the current state of the island Elbaf, which has been mentioned since Little Garden. I'm so ready for Usopp to throw hands in that arc. But this is also where Shanks and his crew were, and it's also the first time seeing Dory and Broggy again since Little Garden. Yeah, the nostalgia hits. But we rarely see Shanks in action, and this scene did not disappoint. He uses his observation hockey, and the way the scene is showcased was just beautiful. I love the realization that Shanks has and his immediate step into action to fight so that the future he sees doesn't come to pass. I don't think we've ever seen Shanks moving like this, and I'm very curious to see what happens when he meets Luffy. Are they going to fight, giving it their all, or are they going to laugh over some drinks? Shanks absolutely shreds Kid in this fight, and it almost makes Kid look weak. But the viewers know that's not true because he went up against huge threats like Big Mom, and he's made it this far into the new world. So the truth is, Shanks is just insanely powerful. That's pretty much all I have to say about that scene, and I also want to mention that Elbaf looks beautiful. I am so excited for the next arc. Okay, now the marine stuff. I had no idea that we're going to see Garp in action and more of Blackbeard's island. I never realized how close Aokiji and Garp were in their earlier days, and his mentorship reminded me of Garp and Kobe. Even Kobe took after the both of them and did the same training routine when punching the hull of a ship with his fists. What's crazy is they didn't use any hockey for that. It was just their fists getting banged up. We had already heard about the conflict that happened after Marineford, where Aokiji battled Akainu for the title of the Fleet Admiral. Since he lost that battle, we saw him disappear from the Marines, and he went a separate way. I still don't fully get why Kuzan would side with Blackbeard, as that's the exact type of person he fought against. I understand the Navy humiliated him with his loss to Akainu, but I still feel like there could be a larger goal he has. Maybe he's using Blackbeard for something? I'm not fully sure yet, but I'll definitely keep an eye on him. What felt like a comedy relief moment in Kobe's training days actually turned out to be something much more. Garp's lesson, which was to always save the young over the old, seemed kind of like a take. It would be better to do your best to save everyone, but I understood it as the episodes went by. He shared this lesson to prepare them in case there was a time where he would sacrifice himself for them to live on. A repeating pattern I see in One Piece is always out with the old ways and in with the new. The start of the pirate era marked the end of Goldie Roger's time, and the defeat of the 2 emperors was also paving a way for the newer times. I mean, the place everyone goes to is literally called the New World. It can't get any more obvious than that. I think another very good example of this theme is in The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. I know this is a very random example, but I'll be quick about it. At the end of this game, the King of Hyrule decides to drown with Ganondorf and let the old ways pass. It gives Link and Tetra the freedom for a new life, free of responsibilities from the past. This is the king sacrificing himself for a fresh start for the youth. So, like the king in that game, Garp continues to want what's best for the future generation, and will do everything in his power to give them that chance, even if it means sacrificing himself. And in the end, he told that lesson so that the cadets would be ready to abandon him, because he was always the old geezer in that story. Also, can we talk about how freaking insane Garp is? I genuinely thought it was the Colossal Titan that arrived on Beehive Island.
Hey, Aaron. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Armored and Colossal Titan.
I don't get it. Alright, I get it!
When it comes to fights in One Piece, I really don't know how to talk about them because they're so good, and there's just not much more I can comment on. Garp and Aokiji were both very powerful fighters, but Garp definitely had the upper hand on the fight. The only reason he failed to escape was because everyone else came to aid Aokiji and gang up on Garp. There hasn't been a mention or scene with Garp since, and I wouldn't be surprised if he did die because he looked badly wounded. As for Kobe and his escape, he definitely hit a new peak. His honesty impact on Pizarro really felt like an I made it moment. Even though we haven't seen much of Kobe's journey, it's easy to see the difference between where he is now and where he started. From here on out, he'll only grow stronger. So, much earlier I mentioned the Reverie, and ever since the start of this arc, we knew some major events had happened, such as Cobra's death, the murder of a celestial dragon, and Vivi's disappearance. Yet we had no context on why these events happened. The Reverie fixed this when Sabo recapped what he saw while he was at Marie Joy, and there's some pretty dark things happening. The first was Cobra requesting to see the Elders. Now, these guys we have seen very little of. Whenever they're in a scene, they're just sitting down and ore farming. But this situation was different because Cobra went to meet them to ask about Alabasta's queen from long ago, Lily. Judging by how we've seen Imu has a portrait of Lily in their room and reacted that way to Cobra, it's obvious they somehow have a connection. What's even more weird is Lily's disappearance after rejecting to become a celestial dragon. And Imu is also a character I know almost nothing about. If I had to guess, I'd say Imu might be Lily, but I don't have enough information to come to that conclusion. The only reason I think Imu wouldn't be Lily is because Lily has the letter D in her name, and we also learned that the initial D are in those who oppose people like Imu and the Elders. The scene where Imu slowly walks up the stairs right in front of Cobra sent chills down my spine. They clearly stated no one sits on that throne, so everyone could have equal power, but those were lies, and this government is built on lies. I also thought Blackbeard would be the final big bad villain, but after Egghead, it's definitely Imu. Sabo getting mixed up into all of this was also unfortunate timing because he gets framed, but it's also good that there's someone out there who knows the truth, and now that the Revolutionary Army knows this, that will likely put them at more of an advantage in their planning ahead. I also wonder who's leading Alabasta now that Cobra is dead and Vivi is missing. Also, we see Kuma charging back at Marie Joy, and at this time his backstory hadn't been revealed yet, but I promise you I'll get to that soon. Even before getting to the backstory, it was still hard to watch the way Akainu and the Celestial Dragons treated him. I was so happy he got away, and I was definitely not ready for his story. By the time all of this has happened, we go back to Egghead and we see the Straw Hats dealing with the Seraphim crisis. And oh boy, you know it's trouble when CP0 wants to team up with the Straw Hats. A large war was also being built up because we see the arrival of many Navy ships right outside of Egghead. And on those ships there are many Marines, the Navy Admiral Kizaru, and oh, that's an Elder. Oh. I like how it seemed that York had everything under control when calling the Elders, but then just a few seconds later she was crying for help, with the Straw Hats and Vegapunks standing over her. And then Luffy talking to the Elders. That moment was just cinema. I've always wondered about the Elders, what exactly their goal is in controlling the world government. Do they just want power over others? And how many years have they been alive for? Because it seems like they've been alive for a long time. And after seeing them with their transformations, do they even have devil fruits, or are they some other species entirely? We're probably not getting answers soon, so I'll just shut up. Anyways, Kizaru facing Senomaru was sad because you can tell neither of them wanted to fight each other, because they've been partners for so long. Kizaru versus Luffy was another banger of a fight. I love how Luffy didn't even hesitate before he jumped Kizaru. Also thanks to Mr. Anonymous for pointing out the callback when Shocky says Rayleigh is 100 times stronger than the Straw Hats all the way back in Sabaody. And now in Egghead, Luffy points out that they're 100 times stronger than they were in their last encounter with Kizaru. Again, I love seeing these characters grow, and I probably wouldn't have caught that callback. I think it's so funny how we see Kizaru literally sweating in his fight against Luffy, because you can tell he is scared. Also, I just have to say it, but Kizaru looks like a Jedi when wielding his light sword. There's no other way to say it. That's literally what that is. Now, I think it's finally time to talk about Kuma. I'm pretty sure most of you are here mainly for my thoughts on Kuma's story, so buckle up because it's gonna be a rough one. This story took a knife and shoved it through my heart multiple times. It was for sure the saddest story in One Piece so far. Even from the first episode, Kuma's early life broke me. I don't get any enjoyment in seeing people go through slavery and being ripped away from their families. Unfortunately, it's not something that only applies to One Piece, but the real world too. And while most of this happened in the past, there are still plenty of issues with this world like racism. You immediately see this with Saturn's hatred with the Buccaneer people, and Kuma was one of the last ones. It seemed like everything was going to go well for Kuma when he was first born, but that happiness disappears almost instantly when they are taken to be slaves. I also found the Buccaneers' fascination with Nika to be very interesting. It made sense that they believed in someone who could liberate them, because that was some of the only hope they could cling on to. I love the relationship that Kuma had with his father, but unfortunately it doesn't last long, because a stupid celestial dragon shoots him dead just because he thought his dad was annoying. I mean, seriously, these guys are the most evil beings. Bad enough that they have slaves, but to take away someone's life for singing a song, that's just brutal. At this point, Kuma had already lost his entire family, and that's all just in the first episode. I already found myself on the verge of tears, and it wouldn't be the last time. Kuma on God Valley was also very hard to watch because we see Kuma and the others getting shot in the back with arrows, like they're wild animals. This was also where he meets Ivankov, which sets up that relationship and future status in the Revolutionary Army. It's also where Kuma gets his fruit, and apparently this is where Kaido's fruit was too. It was cool to see Big Mom and Kaido's involvement here, and I heard we get way more of that in the Elbaf arc. You can see that Kuma is always thinking of others. He absorbs all of the townspeople's pain so that others don't have to take it, even though it hurts him. I know in my last video, I began talking about how selfless Odin was, but a lot of you pointed out that he did have some selfish acts, such as leaving his people in Wano to go adventure out at sea for his own benefit. But I see zero faults of selfishness with Kuma. His entire life he has done deeds to help others which required him to make sacrifices. Kuma is the most selfless person in One Piece, and he deserved a way better life than what he got. Kuma and Ginny really did seem like a great match, and you could tell they both cared for each other, but I understand why Kuma rejected Ginny's marriage proposal, because he doesn't want to put her and a future generation in the same pain that he went through. He's a buccaneer, and he didn't want his kids to be hated on and put through hell. I also love how Kuma fights back to save the elderly in this town, because he doesn't want them to experience slavery just like him. It was sort of a shock to see Ginny get abducted, and I knew at some point she would have to disappear from the story because there's no mention of her later on, but I didn't think it would happen so early. Some time passes and we see Ginny has become sick after being forced to live with the celestial dragons. We later find out that the sickness was the result of a failed experiment from Saturn, which gives me even more reasons to hate that guy. But it was heartbreaking to see Kuma rush to Ginny and fail to make it to her before she passed. I'm glad Kuma got to raise Bonnie normally for a little bit, but because of Saturn that disease was passed down to Bonnie too, which made it very hard for the both of them to live a normal life. I also like how Kuma passes down his knowledge of Nika, because when his dad passed the story of Nika down to him, it gave Kuma hope in times of troubles, and now he has the chance to do the same for Bonnie. Oh, and Kuma slaps the heck out of that tyrant. That was satisfying. We also learn that Bonnie will not live to the age of 10, which is one, sad for a child, but also sad for her father figure Kuma. And so of course, Kuma does everything in his power to save Bonnie. He goes to Vegapunk to find a cure, and he has it, but Saturn overhears this and can't let this happen without torturing Kuma. You have to be really sick to target one person's life and make sure they experience hell. I seriously hate the Five Elders. The deal was to turn him into a weapon for the Marines, restrict visiting with his daughter, and to lose all his humanity, including memories of his lifetime. And it goes full circle. He started out as a slave, and now many years later he becomes a slave to the government. He wrote letters to Bonnie every day, but none of them ever reached her because of the government dogs that were placed there to keep Bonnie there. And so I'll re-emphasize this idea from my last video. One Piece has always been about freedom. Luffy has it, and he's the liberator. He inspires others and brings hope to the people who are trapped. Bonnie and Kuma are examples of the trapped. They don't get to be free because of this awful government system. This story gave a whole new perspective on Kuma, and while I knew he was never going to be a bad person, I never expected it to hit me this much. Kuma knows his time is up, and he never got to have the freedom. But he does want that freedom to reach others, and by sending Luffy's crew to other parts of the world all the way back in Sabaody, he had helped the oppressed people by giving the world a liberator. Without Kuma, the Straw Hats would likely have met their end much earlier in the story. The final scene where Kuma is running past all of his memories was the trigger to my tears. The scene was so beautifully crafted, and I'm not even kidding when I say this, but right after watching this episode, I rewatched that scene so many times. It's amazing. Vegapunk also being in tears showed his human side. I knew Vegapunk was a good person near the start of Egghead, but he really did care for Kuma, and even programmed the pacifistas to listen to Bonnie over an elder. After watching this arc, I am now sold that this is the best and saddest backstory in One Piece. Kuma, I just want to give you a big hug. The thing that makes a good backstory isn't just the sadness and the backstory itself, but it's how it ties into relevant times. For example, Sanji's backstory in Whole Cake tied into the feeling of despair and loneliness. He didn't have anyone who cared for him except for Luffy and his crew, and I guess his sister too. The point is, the Kuma backstory pays off in the current times of the Egghead arc, because from what we know, Kuma had lost all his memories, yet he still defaults to protecting Bonnie. And that's something I absolutely loved. No matter how much has been taken away from him, his love for his daughter can never be erased. Now, before we get into the whole craziness and the finale of this arc, I need to mention some specific Straw Hat moments. First, Robin. I love how the crew lets her rest and tries to comfort her, because this is her third Buster Call, and she's already been through that hell. Sanji also has a combat moment where he goes up against an elder to save Bonnie, and that requires some serious guts, but I think they've all proven themselves by now for their bravery. Although Usopp, I seriously need you to lock in for Elbaf. Thanks, buddy. Zoro versus Lucci was so funny to me because Zoro's motivation and lock-in at the end was because of Sanji's insults. But hey, it worked, so that's all that matters. The arrival of Dory and Brogy was an awesome entrance, and it just made me realize the scale of this war. We have giants coming all the way from Elbaf to help the Straw Hats. The entire government is nuking the island. It's madness. I also liked how the pacifistas kept switching sides due to the hierarchy of Vegapunks and Marines. It added a little twist to the battle. And when Bonnie was about to get blasted by hundreds of lasers, I just loved how Kuma huddled around her to protect her from the blasts. Moments with Kuma never really hit me this much, but after viewing the backstory it just made for a whole new experience. The battle was like an Avengers Endgames build battle. It's for sure up there with the Marine Forward War. I remember earlier in the video I was saying how I need to prepare myself for characters to die more. Well, I definitely did not do that in time because Vegapunk's death was a shock. I know the entire point of the Marines' mission was to assassinate Vegapunk, but I feel like I had the right to still be a little shocked. I honestly thought he would get away with the Straw Hats. What was even more of a shock was the sudden broadcast of Vegapunk to the entire world. I remember being so excited to watch the next episode when he said, "I have truth to reveal to the world." And then he didn't get to that truth for another 9-ish episodes. Instead he starts talking about Vega coffee and random things, and I honestly don't remember the reason he couldn't just go straight to his speech. Someone please let me know in the comments. Around this time there's a cut to the 5 elders aura farming, once again, but I decided to make a post this one day and I said, they gotta be shaking in their boots right now, and I love it. And then, shout out to this guy for making the joke, well, unfortunately these boots were made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. And of course that references the elders arriving onto Egghead with their giant weird-ass transformations. By the time the elders have all arrived on the island, I genuinely thought it might be over for Luffy. I don't think the problem with the elders was their strength, but instead it was their immortality. They would just get up again and again. Like, how are you supposed to defeat that? That horse elder was really moving though. He cut down the entire line of pacifistas, which is honestly probably for the better because it means the government won't have them for the future. The Straw Hats also have a problem with getting their ship out to sea, and it required Edison to sacrifice themselves. And even later we see Atlas sacrifice herself to let the Straw Hats and Lilith escape. Sacrifice has been a core theme in Egghead, and it's happened with Vegapunk, who made sure that Bonnie's voice is superior to the elders in controlling the pacifistas, Kuma with pretty much his entire life sacrificed for his child, Garp with his sacrifice to give the newer generation a future, and the other Vegapunks which died in the cause to help the Straw Hats. Sacrifice is everywhere in this arc, and it really goes to show how much faith and love is present in these people. When the elders kept looking for the broadcast snail, I got so nervous because I was super excited to hear what Vegapunk had to say. I thought that all the answers are there, they just need to be said. And so when one of the elders finally reached what looked to be that broadcast snail, you can bet I was about to riot. But then, that ended up not being the correct snail, and the correct snail had something to do with something I completely forgot about up until then. One of the most mysterious things on Egghead, the robot. Emmett is very clearly connected to the idea of freedom, because he awakens when Luffy is in his most free state. I'm so curious to know the full backstory with Joy Boy and Emmett, because it seems like there's a large history there. I mean, the Void Sentry sounds so big, I just can't wait until it's fully revealed. I also thought that Bonnie's realization that Luffy was Nika was so perfect. Her transformation into Nika was the freedom she needed, and I just really wish Kuma could have also gotten that freedom. There's a few final things to discuss. Vegapunk's message. I actually have a very funny story with this situation. A few months back, probably before I even started Egghead, I saw a reel on Instagram. It said something about the One Piece world sinking. Now, at the time I was like, oh shoot, spoiler. But the funny thing is I actually forgot about it up until this very moment where Vegapunk says it himself. So I did still experience the shock of that news because I somehow forgot about it. I find that to be so crazy and so lucky. I also now realize that I should have seen this coming because it has been hinted at since the end of Wano. They literally say that the old Wano is underwater, and they visit it too. Vegapunk's message also explains why the One Piece world is the way it is. Ever since the first few arcs, I've always wondered why there's always small islands and a world filled with pirates. Well, now it makes sense, because this world used to be made up of continents, but they all split apart. One thing that came as a total surprise to me was the reason for the sinking of the world, which was the use of the ancient weapons that have been mentioned since Alabasta. This also explains the Lulusia incident, which means it was indeed one of the ancient weapons used by the world government, which is very scary to think about. There's one dictator that manages the entire world and can pull out an ancient weapon whenever needed. That's terrifying. Anyways, those were all some very important lore bits, and I'm very excited to see more as the show goes on. The release of the Haki from Emmett is absolutely insane. You even see Luffy looks worried by this Haki's presence, and that's when he's in his goofiest form. It makes me really excited to see Joy Boy's full story and his strength against the government. The final blow to Saturn from both Luffy and Bonnie was just absolute cinema. I know it feels like I'm repeating things, but it's true. These moments are so well done. I feel like every arc in One Piece does a fantastic send-off. I'll be honest, Egghead was very chaotic and captivating, and Kuma's backstory was for sure the best, but I think Wano was an overall better arc for me, just because of how much it was set up in before arcs like Punk Hazard and Zhao, and that final act, it was just so good. These arcs have both been amazing. I also like how there was a last minute plot twist where Vegapunk already knew there was an impostor, and him assuming it was Lilith was hilarious. And also, goodbye Saturn, you will not be missed. And as the Straw Hats sail away, Kuma is holding Bonnie, and he's smiling. Man, what a great story. So, to sum it up, Egghead was a fantastic arc. There's huge threats and truths revealed, and so much is compacted into just one arc. Sacrifices are made in order to set up a better future, and the world is constantly changing and building on the foundation that's already set. It's an arc that set out with a simple plot and quickly fell to chaos and a heartbreaking story to the mysterious character Kuma. The 5 elders getting involved proves how much of a danger the Straw Hats are to the world government, because we've never seen them that scared before. I can't wait to learn more about Imu and the final voyage to Laugh Tale. Initially, when I started this show, I thought the One Piece would be an endless amount of wealth, but after getting this deep into the show, I believe it will reveal the full truth of this mysterious world. Thanks for watching this video, and if you enjoyed, please make sure to share it around with your friends, like the video, and subscribe. If you haven't already seen my Wano video and you enjoyed this one, I highly recommend going to watch it because it's in the same style as this one. Also, if you want to see more of my direct reactions to events that happened in Egghead, I have posted almost my full Egghead journey in my community posts. I don't know if I'm going to do the same for Elbaf, just because it would likely spoil things for people, but if I do it, I'll make sure to clearly mark it as a spoiler. I will eventually make an arc tier list and opening ranking video, but I see that being further down the line because I'm gonna need a little break after the release of this one, just because it took a lot of energy to make. I will do my best to continue weekly short videos, so there's always that. And if you want to join the official TN Legends Discord channel, where you can chat anything One Piece, Zelda, or literally anything you want to, the link can be found on my homepage. And with that, I will see you all in Elbaf.